This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of April 2nd, 2023. What's on my mind this week? How to improve your AI prompts. Yes, it's another week of AI-related content. If you got something you'd rather hear about instead, please let me know. Anyway, this week, I had the pleasure and privilege to be the opening keynote at the Martechopia conference in London, where I talked through the basics of large language models like GPT-4, Palm, etc., and the interfaces that they use like ChatGPT, Bing, Bard, Microsoft Copilot, etc. Feedback from the folks who attended was generally good, but the same question kept coming up in comments afterwards online in my inbox. How do we write better prompts? That is the number one question people are asking. How do I write better prompts? So today, that's what we're going to tackle. How to write better prompts for large language models. Now, the point of view I'm going to be taking should be unsurprising if you've been reading the newsletter for a while. We're going to rely on how the technology works to inform our protocols, our processes for writing better prompts. For the most part, I'll be using the models released by OpenAI, InstructGPT, GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the default for ChatGPT, and GPT-4. First, let's discuss what these models are capable of, what specific tasks they were trained to do. The OpenAI folks released a research paper about a year ago now. And in this research paper for InstructGPT, which was the immediate precursor, the predecessor to GPT 3.5, which is what ChatGPT uses now. For that precursor model, that actually ChatGPT started with that back in November when it launched, OpenAI specified a collection of 6 core types of tasks that the model performed well on and that people were using it for. Generation and brainstorming, knowledge seeking, open and closed question and answers, conversation, rewriting, summarization and extraction, and classification. So what are these tasks? Well, based on the documentation, they break out like this. Number 1, generation and brainstorming. Should be fairly obvious. Things like, hey, write me a blog post, write me an outline, give me some ideas for a staycation. These are content creation tasks that are either result in completed content, like a first draft, or outlines of content or some form of content. This category is what the majority of users do with large language models, and amusingly, this is also the category that large language models are least good at. We'll come back to that later. The second category is knowledge seeking through open or closed Q&A. This is using the language model like a search engine. Right? What are the best places to visit in London on a shoestring budget? How do you poach an egg? What's the fastest land animal? And so forth. Here, we're not assessing the model on its generation skills so much as using it as a faster search engine or a search engine that deals with complex queries more skillfully. Right? You can ask it a really detailed question that you just can't type into a Google. Closed Q&A is giving the models questions with provided answers, like a multiple choice test. This, which you'll see in the GPT-4 technical publication, is how these models do things like pass the bar exam, pass the medical school exam, etc. The third category of task is conversation, actual chat, people having real conversations with the models, and they just talk to them. Right? The fourth category is rewriting. Given a piece of text, rewrite the text in some way. For example, given something in, say, Danish, rewrite it in English. Take this text and turn it from one thing to another. One of my favorite utilities is to take a transcript of a voice recording and have models like GPT-4 rewrite it so that it gets rid of the ums and uhs and filler text, right? It's not creating anything net new. It's just changing the language. This is one of the tasks that these models are best at. The fifth category is summarization and extraction. This is feeding a model a pile of text and having it condense or extract the text. Examples would be summarizing a long article or a paper into a paragraph, turning a blog post into a tweet, or extracting meeting notes and action items from a transcript. Again, this is one of the tasks that large language models really excel at. The sixth category is classification, in which we give a model a lot of text and have it perform classifying tasks on it. For example, we could give it a pile of tweets and have it assign sentiment scores to those tweets. give it a letter written by somebody, and have it create a psychological profile using the Big Five scoring system from that. Now, are there emergent tasks that don't fall into these categories neatly? Yes. There are or tasks that are a combination of one or more of these categories. For example, in the talk I gave, one of the tasks I had ChatGPT tackle was to read an NDA and tell me what wasn't in it that is common in other NDAs. That falls under knowledge seeking as well as summarization, plus some reasoning that doesn't fit neatly in either category. Now, I mentioned a few times that some tasks are better suited for language models than others. Somewhat ironically, the task people seem to use these models the most for, which is generation, is the task that these models tend to do, well, least well at. That's not to say that they do it badly, but it's the most complex and difficult task with the highest likelihood of unsatisfactory results. Why? Because the underlying architecture of the models is designed for transformation, hence the name of OpenAI's models. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Transformers, without getting bogged down into the heavy mathematics or code, are really good at understanding the relationship among words. Unlike older machine learning algorithms, they are very good at remembering things, which is why they can create such realistic text. They remember things like word order and context in the sense of probability, right? The probability that the next word in a sentence like, I pledge allegiance to the, is nearly 100% that it's going to be flag, right? Especially for U.S. English speakers. And very, very low chance that the word's going to be rutabaga, right? You're probably going to say, I pledge allegiance to the flag and not I pledge allegiance to the rutabaga. If you're speaking UK English, you would say God save the king, not God save the rutabaga. It probably doesn't happen all that often. That's all probability based. When companies like OpenAI make these models, they train them on billions of pages of text to create essentially a massive probability matrix, like a probability library. And then when we work with these models, we are using these pre-trained probabilities, hence the P in GPT. It's a pre-trained transformer. So how does this relate to the 6 categories and writing better prompts? Well, consider how much guessing of probabilities the machine has to do with generation tasks. If you say, write a blog post about the importance of seatbelts in cars as a prompt, it has to go dig into its table of probabilities, its library of probabilities, to understand what does cars mean? What are seatbelts? Why are they important? What a blog is, what a blog post is, and then come up with patterns of probabilities to answer that question. That's why when you write a short prompt for a generation task, you tend to get lackluster outputs, right? Outputs that are filled with bland language. The machine is having to guess a lot of probabilities to fulfill that request, and when it does so, it's pretty generic. Contrast that with a prompt like, rewrite this text fixing grammar, spelling, punctuation, and formatting, followed by the actual text. What is the mechanism? What does the machine need to do? It needs to scan the original text, look at it, the probabilities of words in its library of probabilities, right? Look at the actual probabilities, the actual relationships of words in the text that we gave it, and basically just fix up the text based on its library of probabilities. That's why these tools are so good at tasks like rewriting. They don't have to do any creation. They don't have to do any guessing of probabilities. They're just basically doing editing. Think about this in your own life. Is it easier for you to write or edit? Chances are the majority of people find it easier to edit something that they've written rather than, stare at the blank page. There's that blinking cursor and you're like, oh, lovely, right? It's easier to edit something than it is to try and conquer the blank page. So let's revisit the task list. Which tasks use existing information versus which tasks are asking the machine to create something net new, which is a writing task versus an editing task. Generation and brainstorming, that's writing. Knowledge seeking, questions and answers, that's writing. It's writing. Conversation, that's writing. Rewriting, that's editing. Summarization and extraction, that's editing. Classification is mostly editing. So what does this mean? when it comes to prompts. The more writing a machine has to do, the longer and more complex your prompts have to be to give it the raw materials to work with. Write a blog post about birds is a terribly short prompt that's going to yield terrible results. A page-long prompt about the specific birds you care about, along with their characteristics, data, wingspan, diet, blah, 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 that's going to yield a much more satisfying result for a generation task, for a writing task. Again, we see this in the real world. Suppose you hire a freelance writer, right? How long does your creative brief need to be to help them generate a good result? If you say, hey, write a 1,500-word article about birds, any good writer is going to be like, you want to be a little more specific there, buddy? If you told that same writer, hey, I need a 1,500-word article about birds, about this specific kind of bird and its migratory habits and all this stuff, you're going to get a better article out of that writer. Now, if you hire an editor, how detailed do your instructions need to be to help them generate a good result? I would wager that the instructions you need to give to an editor will be shorter than the instructions you need to give to a writer. Still not like short, you know, to say like, here's my book, edit it, right? That's still not going to give you a good result. But you might say, hey, I want you to perform, grammar edits or spelling edits or developmental edits, something, you're going to give them some focus, but it's going to be shorter than what you have to give the creative brief for the writer. The same is true for large language models like ChatGPT and the GPT-4 model. For an editing task, a prompt like fix grammar, spelling, punctuation, and formatting, along with the provided text, that's going to yield a very satisfactory outcome despite the shortness of the prompt because it's an editing task. That's part one of how to write better prompts. Now let's tackle part two, the formatting. What should the format of a good prompt be? Well, it depends on the system and the model. For OpenAI's ChatGPT and the GPT family of models, they are very clear about how they want developers, people who write code, to interface with their models. And this is, by the way, is the secret to getting good prompts. Read the documentation for developers to see what they tell developers to do, right? So here is the playground. It's called the playground for developers to work with ChatGPT. What we see in the developer's version of ChatGPT is three components: a system prompt, a user prompt, and an assistant. The system part of the prompt intake is what we call a role. Here we define what role the model will be, what role it's going to take. For example, we might say, you will act as a B2B marketer. You have expertise in B2B marketing, especially lead generation and lead nurturing. You specialize in email marketing and email newsletters as key parts of audience retention and engagement strategy. This role statement is essential for the model to understand what it's supposed to be doing, because the words used here help set guardrails, help refine the context of what we're talking about. They give the model more to look up in its probability library, right? We just talked about the probability libraries. The second part of the prompt is the user statement. This is where we give the model specific directions. Your first task is to write a blog post about the importance of a weekly email newsletter in an overall marketing strategy. These instructions are what the model carries out. The third part is the assistant part, where the model returns information. So, for writing tasks, having a robust system statement and an equally robust user statement is essential to getting the model to perform well. The more words, the more text we provide, the better the model is going to perform, because it basically means the model has to generate fewer wild guesses. It has more probabilities to look up, more to latch onto. For editing tasks, you may not even need the system statement because you're providing all the text you want the model to work with. It's just processing it, right? Let's look at an example. Suppose for a writing task, I only provide the user statement, either in the developer edition or in the ChatGPT consumer edition. What are the results? Here's the developer edition, right? And here's the consumer edition. They're pretty much the same thing. And in both examples, they're pretty, generic, right? There wasn't a ton for the model to latch onto. There wasn't a ton of stuff in terms of probabilities for it to generate really unique content. So it created some pretty generic stuff, right? We see, the developer one says consistency breeds familiarity, nurturing relationships. The consumer one says build and nurture relationships, drive traffic and boost engagement, provide value and build awareness, right? That's pretty generic stuff. Now, let's add a detailed system statement to see how things change, right? Here's the developer edition, And there's that system statement. See, right at the top there, it says you'll act as a B2B marketer, the one we just read out loud. Right? And then let's go to the consumer version. You can see the first paragraph of the consumer version is the system statement, and the second paragraph of the prompt in the consumer version is the user statement. And we can see the results here are better, right? It talks about lead generation, nurturing leads, engaging with your audience. And this is true in both of these. The developer edition saying audience retention, engagement, and lead generation. See how much more specific the content is with the addition of the system statement. Both the consumer edition and the developer edition create much more similar content, and that content is more detailed and more focused because we're giving the transformer architecture, the GPT, more to work with, more probabilities. The art and science of writing prompts is a discipline called prompt engineering. It's a form of software development, except instead of writing in a language like C or Java or Python and so on and so forth, we're writing in plain natural language, but we are still giving directions to a machine for a repeatable output. And that means we are programming the machine. We are developers. We are coders. We're just coding in regular language. For your prompts to do better with these machines, adhere to the way the system is architected and designed. Adhere to the way the models work best. Understand the different classes of tasks and what you're asking of the machine, and then provide appropriate prompts for the kind of task you're performing. Here's the bottom line. Always include a detailed system statement in any writing tasks. Include them optionally in editing tasks, and don't be afraid to be very, very detailed in either. You will get better results. Why is this method of prompt engineering different than the top 50 ChatGPT prompts webinar or ebook that people are advertising on your social media feed? It's simple. This method aligns with how the technology actually works, how it was built, and how companies like OpenAI are telling traditional software developers to talk to their models for optimum performance. When you know how something works, you can generally make it work better. And that's why this method will probably work for you. All right, what else we got in the news this week? There's like 90 days left until Google Analytics 4 is the only way you can use Google Analytics. Universal Analytics is going to shut off. So if you have not gone and made the transition yet, please take the course that's in the newsletter. And if you don't want to take the course and you just want someone to do it, hit reply. Tell me. That's literally what my company does. All right, what else we got this week? I did a rant yesterday on the open letter to the technology community about a 6-month AI pause, which was the dumbest thing I read all week. That gives you a short version of my perspective on it. The article, the video is a bit longer and goes into why it's just dumb. Also, did a podcast this week on practical use cases of ChatGPT, and talking also about the large language bake-off. So lots and lots of stuff like that. Let's talk about jobs. New jobs this week. We have analytics consultant at Verto Digital, analytics implementation engineer at Best Buy Canada, art director at Feld Entertainment, content marketing specialist at GovCIO, customer success manager at Rockerbox, digital analyst at ThreeSpot, digital marketing specialist at GovCIO, senior content marketing manager at TestDouble, senior technical analyst at Huge Incorporated, and solutions architect both in the US and UK offices at Snowplow. What else was in the news this week? TikTok Reels and performance statistics, and then literally just all ChatGPT all the time. It really has devoured all the conversation there is about there. So let's see what else is in the news. Oh, my friend Lena's got a new book of poetry. Go check that out. It's in the dealer's choice. I ordered a copy of it. I've yet to open it up, but I thought was kind of cool. Some stuff on how to add apps to your Discord server, things like that. Upcoming events in April, April 19th. If you're anywhere near San Francisco, I will be at the Analytica B2B Influencer Summit, where I am sure that I'll be talking about ChatGPT and B2B influencers. But there'll be a bunch of great folks there, so come visit that. Tickets are free to that, but there's a limited number, so make sure that you apply through the link in the newsletter. Also, B2B Ignite, Chicago, May of 2023. ISBM, also in Chicago, September 2023. So I've got 2 Chicago trips coming up. Marketing Profs B2B Forum here in Boston in October. Tons of events coming up, all about, you guessed it. I wasn't even going to say it anymore. So that is the news for this week. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, whether you're watching or listening or reading. I appreciate you. I appreciate you being here. Again, if you've got stuff that you want to hear about that is not ChatGPT, right? Hit reply. Let me know. I'd love to talk about other things, but right now, this is literally all is my inbox is. Thank you. I'll talk to you next time. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.